This meeting to order. Bienvenue à
Welcome to meeting number 20 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research.
meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June 16th, we are meeting on the study of research and scientific publication in French. Pour garantir le bon déroulement.
To ensure the meeting runs smoothly, I would like to now announce a few points to remember. Before taking the floor, please wait for me to recognize you by name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to turn on your mic. Please remain muted when you are not speaking. As regards interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, which is original language, English or French. For those in the room, you may use your earpiece and choose your channel. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses must be addressed through the chair.
For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can and appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. J'aimerais maintenant.
I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Appearing as an individual, Linda Cardinal. She is the Associate Vice President of Research at the French Ontario University. Valérie Lapointe-Gagnon, Associate Professor of History. And for the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities, Éric Forgue, Executive Director.
We'll now have opening statements. Each of our three witnesses will have 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this green card, and that will tell you you are at the 4.5-minute mark, and there are 30 seconds left. We want to be as fair as we can to all our witnesses. And with that, we will start with Professor Cardinal. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair.
Oh, Monsieur Blanchet-Jacquard?
Oui, bonsoir.
Mr. Blanchet-Jacquard. Yes, good evening. Could you please confirm for me that sound tests have been completed with all witnesses?
Yes, Monsieur Blanchet-Jacquard, we have all our witnesses.
Non, la question.
No, the question, Madam Chair, is whether sound tests have been completed with all the witnesses and if they went well and if they succeeded for all witnesses.
Je pense que le greffier a quelque chose à dire.
I believe the clerk would like to intervene. Yes, I can confirm that when witnesses joined the meeting today, we did complete the sound tests.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and merci, Monsieur Blanchet-Jacquard. And with that, we will go to our first witness. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you to present my analyses and reflections on research and publication in French. I would above all, like to share a few of my recommendations. But first, I would like to let you know that for 30 years, I have been active on this subject. In fact, since the beginning of my career as a professor at the University of Ottawa, and now as Vice President of Research at the French University of Ontario, where I'm committed to this issue on a daily basis. My work has revealed that since the 1950s, there have been 3 major moments in the establishment of a French research space in minority context in Canada. This is what I have seen in my work and have recently published about. The first moment was institutional in nature. Beginning in the 1950s, numerous research centers opened in the Canadian Francophonie, including at the universities of Ottawa, Moncton, and St. Anne University. The second important moment was when a fundamental organization took place, including many networks that were put in place, including the network of French-Canadian researchers, which today has become an association. At the same time, a new type of publication happened, and this was a synthesis type of document, and we saw this across the country. But I mostly want to focus on the third moment, and this happened at the Montfort Hospital crisis. And there was new action by the federal government at this time. The federal government funded the National Health Consortium, whose offices were at St. Paul University, and the government supported the creation of the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities, and the director of that institute is going to testify today as well. Over the years, other research centers have been funded across the country, including in Saskatchewan, and the creation of the Office of Francophone and Francophile Affairs in Vancouver. Over the past 25 years, the Canadian government has encouraged the creation of a research space in French, but we cannot claim that this mission has been accomplished. Today, it is possible to improve the structure of actions that have been taken in the past. And we would like to propose recommendations to better support French research in Canada. I would like to recommend that the Canadian government adopt a more specific support program for research in French in Canada that includes structuring activities. And secondly, I would like for the committee to support Bill C-13 to modernize the Official Languages Act, in which the Canadian government states that it wishes to support the creation and dissemination of information in French that contributes to the advancement of scientific knowledge in any discipline. I would like to discuss this bill further during the question and answer period. So since the 1950s, researchers in the Canadian Francophonie have shown undeniable dynamism. However, we are facing important sociocultural obstacles to pursue our work, including the lesser appreciation of work in French and also on the Francophonie. The situation is detrimental to the careers of our young colleagues who, according to the work of my colleague François Rocher, consider it more advantageous to publish in English. We're therefore at risk of losing a tradition of research in French built over the years by researchers who, like me and many others, have devoted their careers to developing content in French and to showing that the Francophonie was the object to be studied and including skills to be mastered to participate in the public life of this country. Another witness presented you with data by Vincent Larivière, which was very eloquent, and I hope that you will be able to hear more about Vincent Larivière's findings. The federal government has a role to play to achieve substantial linguistic equity in Canada. Thank you very much. That was my 5 minutes.
Merci. Thank you so much, Professor Cartanel. We appreciate your being here. And now we will go to Professor Lapointe-Gagnon for 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, and good evening to all committee members. I would like to warmly thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. Since my arrival at the campus at Saint-Jean, located in Edmonton in 2015, I have discovered the richness and complexity of the Western Francophonie. It is unknown, complex, and evolves in a research environment that is vibrant but also precarious. Coming from Quebec, I quickly became aware of many obstacles that stand in the way of those who wish to contribute to French in an Anglophone province like Alberta. ACFAS completed a study on research in minority French settings in Canada, and I have had the opportunity to collaborate with colleagues from Francophone and bilingual post-secondary institutions across the country to better understand the challenges faced by those researching in French. We are invisible and are often lost among the Anglophone majority. Publishing in English is often the only option to have the same opportunities to receive grants, other fundings, or prestigious awards, just like our English colleagues. The essential French work is not always valued as it should be, even though our work is published in one of the 2 official languages of the country. And our work reflects unique perspectives that are the lived reality in minority communities. And our research is currently in a very precarious situation. I know this precarity very well because the Saint-Jean campus has been going through a crisis for the past number of years. In 2020, when there were budget cuts imposed by the Alberta provincial government, our campus had to be dramatically restructured. Francophone colleagues and myself had to be distributed to other faculties, and this was at great loss to the Francophone community. However, our campus is at the heart of the Francophone community, and we contribute to its dynamism. The University of Alberta later changed its mind and went back on the restructuration of the Saint-Jean campus. But our campus is not the only one to have experienced such a situation. For example, Laurentian University, also the University of Moncton, that experiences financial difficulties and has had to increase tuition fees for its students. Also, the University of Sudbury, that is struggling to become the university that it needs to be to respond to the needs of Francophone students in Northern Ontario. At the root of these problems is a drastic underfunding to post-secondary studies in French in Canada. Students have a difficult time completing the courses and having access to the courses needed to complete their studies in French. We're talking about pillars of culture that allow people to live their lives in French, comparable to theater and the arts. This is a place where people come to live in French. And we need to benefit from a certain stability so that we can plan for the future. This stability currently does not exist. How can we attract a new generation of students and researchers without this stability? But every day in my career, I do notice the positive contributions of our research, especially for the new generation.
Le cas d'une étudiante qui a utilisé ses riches archives familiales francophones pour faire connaître l'histoire de son aïeul qui a fondé le petit village de Plamondon. Cette étudiante était de la première génération à renouer avec le français après 2 générations qui avaient été assimilées faute d'accès.
The interpreter apologizes. She did not turn her microphone on properly. That's just an example among many others. So I'd like to wrap up by saying that I have some recommendations for the committee. It's important to contribute to the funding of post-secondary institutions. I'm sorry, Professor Lapointe-Gagnon.
Can
In the last
someone
30
confirm
seconds, I would say. Not even 30
the last?
seconds. Very, very, very briefly.
Should we have Professor Lapointe-Gagnon repeat that section? Professor Gagnon, would it be possible? This is very difficult to go back about 30 seconds.
Oui, je vais essayer de.
Well, I'll try to go back to where I was about 30 seconds ago. I think I was at the part where I was saying that colleges and universities aren't just places that transfer knowledge. They're also cultural pillars. And I had the example of the St. John campus. And in order to they're important for doing research in French. We need to have stability. And we need to project that stability into the future. But this is not something that we can count on the ground at present. How can you attract students who will form the new generation of researchers in places where the very existence of the institution has been called into question? I see, as a professor, what an important role that research plays among students of the future and future researchers. It's also something that can help us to counter the problems facing these communities. And I can mention the case of a student who used her rich family archives to encourage more research in French, etc. I have some recommendations, and I'd like to go over them quickly. First of all, to contribute to funding post-secondary institutions. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Professor Lapointe-Gagnon.
I'm hoping that when we go to the questions for our members, they will ask you about the recommendations. And thank you for being so gracious, because it was difficult without the translation. Merci.
Merci, aucun problème.
Thank you, no problem.
And if now we could go to, from the Institut Canadien de...
From the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities, Eric Forg, the Executive Director. You have 5 minutes. Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation. I salute the fact that your committee is focusing on science in French, and I'd like to delve right into the heart of the matter in my remarks. In order to intervene in a structuring manner in the French language research and publication sector, it's important to understand the context of knowledge production as a whole and to have a good understanding of the institutional framework in which French language research is conducted. This action must be defined in terms of a strategic vision if we want it to be pertinent, relevant, and effective. Now, although this is an area of provincial jurisdiction, the Canadian government can support the university community. It needs to do more to strengthen the post-secondary environment, which offers French language programs. It must help colleges and universities to develop and expand the range of programs offered to better meet the training needs of Canadian society in both official languages. It's important to consolidate and develop programs because research is developing in areas where there are programs in secondary or graduate programs. This is very important. A study conducted for Canadian Heritage shows that STEM programs are less frequent in Francophone university programs and are absent in provinces west of Ontario. And we know that graduate programs are extremely important for research. So the selection of programs in French is limited and concentrated in certain institutions. Therefore, it's important to develop the range of university programs in French, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels, especially in the case of STEM, as I mentioned earlier. This is a structural-based approach upstream of research, which can have an impact on the development of research. Most French language or bilingual universities are small and don't have the same resources and research capabilities as large universities. It's important to remember that the federal research granting councils, SSHRC, the Natural Sciences Research Council, etc., are subject to the Official Languages Act and must therefore, under Section or Part 5 of the Act, take positive steps to support the development of Francophone minority communities. Given their field of intervention, which is to fund research, these granting councils should intervene more substantially to support research activities that are conducted in French and bilingual universities. It would be important for there to be political leadership to invite the granting councils to interpret the Official Languages Act generously by putting in place action plans that will contribute to achieving equality in research. Bear in mind that the equality of both languages, substantive equality between two official languages, is outlined in Bill C-13. In order to protect and promote science in French, strategic and robust action is required, and this requires support from these funding agencies. We need to support French language journals as well, for the Francophone public, for French-speaking people, because they must have access to these documents in formats that are accessible in French. We also need to develop a strategy, a language management strategy for the language of research in partnership with ACFAS, CFUA, and the granting councils. So some avenues worth exploring. In conclusion, support for French language journals, financial incentives for bilingual journals to increase the proportion of articles in French, support for translation into French and publication of articles that have been written in English, support for Francophone and bilingual journals to facilitate their transition to open access, support for knowledge-based activities for the general public and for knowledge users. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to all our witnesses. We really appreciate your time and effort tonight. You have a very interested committee who wants to hear from you, to ask you questions. And we'll now begin our 6-minute round of questioning. And tonight we begin with Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for being here tonight and the witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Norman. And we were talking a little bit about what type of services or assistance do researchers need to carry out their work in French? Sorry, the first presenter tonight was my notes wrong. Sorry, Cardinal. Sorry about that. Redirect there, but same question is what type of services or assistance do researchers need to carry out their activities in French, including their research? I trying to understand where the issue is or what services that they need assistance with in publishing their work, organizing their scientific events, or applying for funding in a different language. I just want you to expand on that a little bit, please.
Merci, Monsieur Tucker. Est-ce que la
Well, thank you, Mr. Tucker. Is the translation working now? Can you hear me? So that Mr. Tucker will understand my comments in French? Yes? All right, thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Tucker. Madam Chair, this question flows from my recommendation for a specific research-based program in French. As we've said, and as my colleague Eric Forg said, we work in very small universities where sometimes research services are very limited. In my university, we're putting in place a research program, but I'm on my own with one other person in order to develop this research program. So we don't always have the resources we need or the support to develop our research services. And in small universities like ours, we have colleagues who also believe in the importance of research. In a large university like the University of Ottawa, where I spent 30 years, doing research in French was an issue. And French was valued there. But if we want to be obtain public recognition and prizes, people have to publish in English. So we need to provide support to encourage researchers to publish in French, to promote the development of research as well. So imagine a situation in an English university where there are francophones. And under our granting councils, we have the right to file, introduce our files, but no one there can read them because they don't understand French. So we prepare the documents in French, but then they need to be, when we appear before the ethics committees or the various committees, they can't read them. And if we've done the research in French, that's another example. And then with respect to the publications, when we develop journals or we work on journals, and I'm a director, we're alone. We're not in universities where we have support. We can't call on our colleagues because there's a shortage of teachers, teaching staff as well. We can't find people to work on our files because oftentimes there aren't any master's programs or PhD programs in French, so we don't have the students who can help work on the evaluations and help with the putting together the documents. So there is a chronic lack of resources that we don't have in our institutions that don't enable us to do the research in French. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I could give you many more examples. But I think that these examples speak for themselves.
To you, Madame. So I've been trying to unpack this or understand this a little bit more, that if you translate it into English, it's viewed by some as plagiarism. Is that the journals would be procedure or policies, or who actually sets that? And is that something that we could actually get around by just publishing more studies in both official languages?
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Well, thank you for the question. Madam Chair, I don't think that translating our documents is plagiarism if we apply for funding. But if I publish an article in French, for example, I wouldn't have it translated to publish it in English. But in bilingual journals, perhaps there should be some quotas for articles in French. Now, for a long time, I participated in the Canadian Political Science Review. I published articles there. I wrote an article on the publication of documents in French there, which was my area of study. There was one article in the journal. All of the articles, the others were in English. So how can we encourage the publication of articles in French in the so-called bilingual journals where there are virtually no articles in French? Because oftentimes...
Sorry, Madame. When you talk about the journals or the different reviews out there, would they be receiving any federal funding? Do you know of?
Oui, à travers le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines.
Yes, through the Humanities Research Council, funding is received, but there is no requirement to have substantive bilingualism there. There used to be more efforts, but there are fewer now, and that could be changed. We could encourage the publication of more articles in French to deserve more funding, for example.
Mr. Tucker,
en matière de bilinguisme.
Thank you to you both. We appreciate it. And now we will go to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for presenting here this evening. If I could ask, I'll start with Professor Lapointe-Gagnon. If I could ask, you were cut off from providing your recommendations, so could you finish the recommendations that you wanted to present to the committee, and then I'll open it up to questions for all the witnesses. And take your time if you need it.
Parfait, merci de me donner la...
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to my recommendations. First, contributing to funding to Canadian Francophonie post-secondary institutions in the long term. Yes, it's under provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government can intervene, especially under official languages. It takes a partnership between the federal government and the provincial government to secure funding. That's the case in Ontario and in Alberta. And programs need to be created to ensure stability. We need funds not only to put out fires, but also to plan for the future. What concerns me the most at present is how are we supposed to conduct research in French if we can't fill the positions that are vacant? The only option that we see is for people moving towards English. Also, the assistance service that was proposed by ACFAS is a recommendation for us. There are many researchers who want to work in French. But research in French is very competitive. Tomorrow, if I go to the University of Alberta, my university, and I submit an application for funding, I have no one to, in social sciences and humanities, I will have no one to revise my work. But an English colleague would have English-speaking colleagues to revise their work and their grant application. We also want to see Bill C-13 be supported, and we want work to be done to better understand the unique needs of Francophone communities by encouraging a true bilingualism in Francophone and bilingual scientific journals in Canada. Also, encouraging exchanges with France, Belgium, but not only European countries, also Acadia in Canada and other Francophone communities in Canada, and also raising awareness in funding councils and research councils about smaller institutions in the Francophone minority where we do not have access to research benefits, research tools rather, and students have more obstacles when they're trying to complete a doctorate, etc. Thank you.
The recommendations, Professor. As a follow-up, can I ask what role secondary institutions play in ensuring that their faculty are supporting the publications in French and support for the French community, those that are studying in French and those that are publishing in French? You mentioned you mentioned the investments from both the federal and provincial governments from a jurisdictional perspective, but what onus falls on the secondary institution to live up to some goals and objectives as well?
Le rôle des établissements.
The role of post-secondary institutions, is that what you're asking about?
Yep.
Oui, bien en fait.
Yes. Well, they're moving away from that commitment. For example, the University of Alberta, on the one hand, it wants to sell its bilingualism, but it also has difficulty supporting its bilingual researchers. We simply don't have access to the same services as our English-speaking colleagues do, and this is the same case in many other universities. Francophone universities are small institutions. For example, the French University of Ontario. There are not very many resources for these researchers, and English majority universities are completely moving away from their responsibility. They're supposed to be there to be relevant to their community, but also to help the Francophone community thrive. We see this in the West. We also see this in Regina. The communities are linked to the university programs, and this creates an ecosystem where ideally the Francophonie would thrive. This is what we want to encourage.
Professor, I have about just less than a minute, Professor Cardinal, and I wonder if you could, in your rush to complete your opening in 5 minutes, you couldn't elaborate or expand upon Bill C-13, and all three witnesses now have referenced it. Do you want to spend the next 45 seconds on the importance of that and what you want to elaborate along those lines for Bill C-13?
Oui, bien, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much. In 45 seconds, all I can do is urge you to vote for C-13 because it will give public servants wiggle room to be able to create a specific program for research in French, which does not exist at Heritage Canada or at the Industry and Science Department. There could be an interdepartmental work carried out between the different departments to identify the needs in minority research, but also to create a structural program to foster this work. I hope I didn't go over time, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Collins, and thank you again to all our witnesses for this really important testimony. And now we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonquière for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I greet our witnesses joining us this evening for this important study. My first question is for Professor Cardinal. In your opening statements, you mentioned C13. I have a simple question to begin. In 2021, is there substantive equality between French and English in scientific research in Canada? Very quickly, I can tell you no, there is no substantive equality. And it's very important, this bill, because it is based on the principle of substantive equality as a linguistic right. And there is a special provision in Bill C13 on research and the recognition that French is also a scientific language across disciplines. So to answer your question, no, there is no substantive equality in research. I believe that my colleagues Valérie and Eric showed you this as well in their testimony, and also in last week's testimony I listened in, and this was laid out clearly for you. ACFAS is playing an important role, and our other partners as well are doing a lot of work in the public space to promote French research work. And this is an important issue for Canadian Francophonie, but also in Quebec, but also across the country. Vincent Larivière, our colleague, also spoke to this. 20 years ago, our colleagues in Quebec used to publish in French, but now, today, many colleagues, including at UQAM, are publishing in English, because if they want to be promoted, if they want to succeed, if they want an international reputation, they have to be publishing in English. And part of my own career takes place in English. We're not rejecting English, but there is a very important part of French work in Canada that is being lost because the transmission of knowledge in French is not fostered. And this is a great loss across the country. Valérie is a historian, and she's also working on this. So there is knowledge transmission that we need to be doing, but we're no longer able to do. We're at the point where we are like Scandinavian countries, where national languages at universities are being lost, and they're being lost to English. Students are only completing their doctorates in English. We see that as well here because they're being told if you want a career, you have to do everything in English. So some of our colleagues don't publish anything at all anymore in French. I'll come back to you, Ms. Cardinal. You're talking about Bill C13, which will improve substantive equality between French and English. Do you believe there is anything else that could be enhanced in this bill to achieve true equality between the two languages, including in scientific publications? What I hope now is that Bill C13 will be adopted and that little changes can be made here and there. But we are in the situation where the longer we wait to pass this bill, the more difficult our situation will become. I am impatiently waiting the passage of that bill so that public servants can really put the tools in place that are necessary. This will also be beneficial in the federal government, and it will help improve understanding of the funding tools. And I want to ensure that there's a true program for research in French in Canada. And the main elements of that can be found in an action plan. But with Bill C13, it would send a message out to all departments. Professor Cardinal, I would like to just come back to the question. Is there anything missing in C13? We know it's an important bill, and the Official Languages Act doesn't get modernized every year. So are there any essentials missing in this bill to be able to roll out linguistic changes to achieve substantive equality? I would like the Bill C13 to be passed as is now. Perhaps changes can be made after. I know ACFAS did propose a small change to a provision on research, but it is a marginal change, and I think now we really are at the stage where we need to pass the bill. Thank you very much. You were talking about what pushes people to research and publish in English. Can you talk about how international universities work, how students are pressured to publish in English and work in English, and how does this play out in scientific research? Well, when it comes to awards, at the last news, publications in French were not considered. People publish in English, and that is what it is considered when it comes to awards. Other criteria are also considered. There's a whole list that has been published in Maclean's, for example. For example, the Shanghai Awards, which is very prestigious. Also, the University of Ottawa is 140th, is one of the 140th best universities in the world for research. Except these award competitions will not improve our research situation because the tendency to publish in English is predominant. You have
Je suis désolée.
I'm sorry. No worries.
Cardinal. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. And we will now go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the witnesses for being with us this evening. I'd like to just continue on the theme of the last question that Mr. Blanchet-Jonca asked, and that is this, and I think this is kind of the elephant in the room or whatever that's driving this difficulty with doing research in French, not just here in Canada, but around the world. I just pulled up some data that showed that French researchers in France in one decade from 1987 to 1997 went from 25% publishing in French to 15%. So they lost 10% of publishing in French, and this is in France. So, and I think what we are tasked with here in this committee is trying to find ways for the federal government to assist French research in Canada. So I just wanted to ask you, Professor Cardinal, and maybe the other three, if we have time, what can the federal government do to change this, turn this big boat around when you have researchers around the world wanting to publish in English, not just for the awards, but for the advancement of their careers, because it's all about citations, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you publish in English, that will work out better because English is the lingua franca of science. I could go on, but I shouldn't. I want to hear from you. So please go on from where you were speaking before to see more toward what the federal government can do to change this.
Oui. Merci beaucoup de votre question.
Well, thank you very much for the question and for enabling me to continue, because this is a worldwide phenomenon we're seeing in France and Switzerland, but it's an official language here. We're in a minority, including with Quebec, and it puts us in a situation where we are doubly disadvantaged. Yes, the federal government can play a role, as I said in my first recommendation, to put in place a structural program for research in French in Canada. Valerie talked about the ACFAS program, which is supporting research in French in Canada, and I think that that is something the federal government could contribute to, could provide. It's supported by Power Corporation. The project has the support of the Quebec government, by the Francophone Association of Universities, and so the only support that hasn't been thrown in is the federal support. Now, we also need to have some clear objectives as well in the granting councils. We have mentioned this on many occasions. We have clearly stated that there aren't enough projects being sought in French. And so these are the funding councils, the granting councils. We have quotas for music in French in Canada. We could have quotas for research in French. Of course, it's more difficult in science, but we can also create or focus on the classic journals and reviews, but there are a number of other ones, and we could create awards or prizes for publishing in French. The Quebec Foundation for Quebec awards a prize for publishing in French, and we're fortunate because Rémi Carillon, who is in charge, he's very favorable to francophonie, and he broadened it to integrate the Canadian francophonie. But we can't simply wait for Quebec to take action. The federal government needs to work with all of these stakeholders in order to show some leadership. Next, the reviews or journals. Funding can be provided to reviews, to bilingual reviews also published in French, not just one type of review. And as Valerie said, there are also research stays abroad, exchanges, but we don't do them here in Canada. We could have a researcher in residence, for example, program in French-speaking universities. I was the regional director for a Francophonie group, and I developed a program with Brazil so that Brazilians could come and participate in this French research here in Canada. But I can't do that in Canada alone with the Canadian provinces. So that is quite astonishing. In the regions, we have regional associations, and they could receive additional funding. Some of them are operating with $3,000 a year. That's not very much. Then there could be grants or scholarships, PhD fellowships to promote research in French, or at the master's level. Now, I could go on and on. I don't know if you want me to continue, but Valerie talked about research chairs as well.
I was hoping to hear from the other witnesses as well, and I don't know if we have
sorry.
any time, but how much time do we have, Madam Chair? You're on mute.
40 seconds.
Okay. Well,
Désolée.
you can continue,
Madame la
Professor
Présidente.
Cardinal, and I will ask the others next time.
Non, mais ça va, je peux les...
No, that's fine. I'll let Valerie say a few words. I think we all agree on the need for support within the federal government to place value on this research, and also outside in universities, Canadian universities, because French is also the language of science. And I think that that's a very important. Oh, yes, good. Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's the worst part of this job. And now, dear colleagues, thank you, Mr. Cannings. We're going to go to the 5-minute round. And it's my understanding that the Conservative Party has conceded their time to Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat. So, Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to continue my questions with Professor Lapointe-Gagnon. Now, you talked about a lack of support for research in French. It's not valued as much. You mentioned some chronic underfunding, for example. I'd like to hear you elaborate on some of the other recommendations. How could the federal government enhance the production and publication of documents in French in this country? Well, thank you for your question. One of the reasons why Francophone researchers or researchers who would like to research in French use English is a matter of prestige and prizes. Oftentimes, well, as Lyndon said, she named a number of aspects. There are prizes, grants, specific awards in areas. We would need to see some scholarships for students. We need to create a space where the value is placed on this research and it's disseminated as well. The danger of going into English is where the research becomes less and less specific. It becomes much broader, and all of the research that needs to be focused on the communities that should be done in the language of the community is threatened unless we encourage that research. So that's the danger of moving to English, because there is a very fine-tuned amount of knowledge of a community, for example, that can be lost. Well, could you give us an example of some of the consequences? Now, you talked about linguist insecurity. There are cultural pillars that exist in the communities you talked about. What are the consequences on the communities of the fact that people can't necessarily do their research and publish in French? One of the main consequences we see back at home is a brain drain of Francophone researchers. If they can't go or stay at Campus Saint-Jean, they'll go to Quebec or they'll go abroad, or they'll simply start publishing in English. And this is a loss for our communities. We saw this in Northern Ontario with Laurentian University as well. It's a disaster for young people. They lose their programs, they lose access to research, the ability to do research, and that challenges their identity, their language, because they thought they would be earning a living in that area, but they're receiving a message that their programs aren't important. These people are going to lose a connection with their language, with their communities, and we saw that at Campus Saint-Jean. We lost students and colleagues from the Faculté Saint-Jean in Edmonton because, and this is an issue. I'd like to move on to a different topic now. Based on your opinion, do we have data on funding that goes to research in French? I think my colleague Eric has perhaps more numbers that he could share with the Committee on Research in French. What we're seeing in data at the research, the health research in health sciences, is a lack of funding. Proportionately speaking, it's lower than in English in health sciences. So I think that that is an obstacle, a barrier that they're facing. But things need to move more quickly. What we're also seeing is that the Social Sciences Research Council, where French should be encouraged, where it is, researchers are not applying. And Francophones are seeking research funding for work in English. Now, I don't know if Eric would like to add some more additional comments to my remarks. Well, there is some analysis that does need to be done on research. When we look at success rates, for example, for applications for funding in French, we haven't really seen a difference. But what we'd need to look at in terms of the amount is in terms of the amounts, and we need to do that analysis. We need to look in greater depth at the Sociopol study that I mentioned in my opening remarks, but I don't necessarily have the figures at my fingertips. But when we look at the way that research is being funded as part of the granting councils, each university is considered to be on the same playing field, on a level playing field, but they aren't. There are some universities who have enormous resources, as was mentioned.
I'm sorry, Professor Ford. Please forgive me. We will, and thank you, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. And maintenant, we will go to Ms. Diab for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much to all of our witnesses who are with us here this evening. This is a very important subject for us all. So thank you. Thank you again for coming. Professor Lapointe, you talked about the ACFAS project and the importance of it. Could you elaborate a little on that project? Absolutely. I would be more than pleased to elaborate on the ACFAS program. Be it a campus or a university, what we're seeing is that there is a shortage of resources on the ground. As I said, if tomorrow I decided to apply for funding at a research council, there's nobody at the University of Alberta who can help me to review my documents, to prepare them. They're all people who have expertise in these areas, who know how to prepare budgets, how to use the right wording so that they can get the funding. Sometimes it's just a few minor tweaks that need to be made to receive the funding. But in French, we don't have that at the University of Alberta. And this isn't just a problem at the University of Alberta. All small institutions have a shortage of resources on the ground. So it's hard to imagine how we could all on each of our campuses have people who are specialized in that area. But why not create a service that's open to all French researchers across the country? That's what ACFAS wants to do. They want to create a service that would review these documents, that would Linda Cardinal talked about this. These are important aspects. If someone's conducting research in French, and then for an ethics committee, we have to translate everything into English. Well, if we could have a pan-Canadian service that would ensure that all of the ethical components have been complied with, and well, then we would have support for our Francophone researchers, and we wouldn't make them work twice as hard because they would have to translate all of their documents within the university. So that kind of a support service would be crucial. It would pool the resources and make it possible for researchers to have access to the reviews that they need, to that kind of support. When you don't have support, you have the impression that your research isn't important. Well, an additional question, if I may. There is a labor shortage in Canada in many areas, and is that one of the reasons why we don't have specialists, for example, who could review your research? Or is it a question of funding? Because most universities, post-secondary institutions, are smaller and that's why. And to resolve that, we'd need to create a service that would be accessible to all across the country. Answer. Well, the competent people are there. It's not a labor shortage, but what we are seeing is a lack of will. If we look at the University of Alberta, when I arrived, we asked for the service, but the person who was bilingual who could help us left. And the university, despite the pressure that we brought to bear, didn't see fit to replace that person. And that's often what's happening in universities. All of a sudden, someone in the research bilingual is a bilingual, and that person can help. There are some 30,000 researchers across the country who could apply for research in French. But if a bilingual person leaves, the position isn't filled. So there are many people in the doctoral stream. Their positions aren't being renewed, but they would be more than pleased to have one of those positions in research that would support all researchers in the community who want to invest in research in French. So the people and the qualified people are there. Sometimes it's the will on the ground that's not. And this type of service, if it could be offered for all institutions across Canada,
Madame Lapointe.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lapointe. I don't have very much time, but Mr. Forgue, I'm very interested in your observations on linguistic minorities. So what role can production and dissemination of French publications outside of Quebec?
Madame Diab, since you don't have time left, perhaps you would like to ask Professor Forgue if he could table his response for you.
Bien sûr, si vous avez un...
Certainly. If you do have an answer, please.
Thank you so much. And dear colleagues, sadly, we have come to the end of this panel. We want to thank our excellent witnesses. We thank you for your expertise. We thank you for being gracious with your time. We hope you've had a good experience and that you might want to come back. And with that, I say thank you to you all. We will suspend briefly as we prepare for our second panel. Merci. Suspended. I understand from our clerk, we are ready to go for panel 2. J'aimerais faire quelques
I would like to make a few points for the benefit of our new witnesses. Before taking the floor, please wait for me to recognize you by name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to turn on your mic. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Regarding interpretation, for those who are on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between floor, which is the original language, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel you wish. As a reminder, All comments by members and witnesses must be addressed through the chair. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the Association of Canadian Francophone Colleges and Universities, Martin Normand, Director of Strategic Research and International Relations. For the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, Annie Pilote, full professor and dean. And for the Quebec Research Fund, Benoit Sévigny, Director of Communications.
Colleagues, we will now go to opening statements. Each of the three groups will have 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this green folder that will let you know that you have 30 seconds left. We do our best to be fair. And with that, I say welcome to you all. Our committee's eager to hear from you. And we will begin now with Director Martin Normand for 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for welcoming us in such an important study for the Francophone post-secondary sector in Canada. I represent the Association of Canadian Francophone Colleges and Universities, which brings together the 22 Francophone or bilingual post-secondary institutions in a Francophone minority context. We represent the interests of our members to improve access to post-secondary education in French. Research and publication in French are among our priority areas of action. We have links with federal research granting agencies to raise awareness about the challenges of researching in French outside of Quebec. We have worked to ensure that research was taken into account in the recent Canada-wide consultations carried out by Canadian Heritage on official languages. We also oversee the Canadian Francophonie Research Network, which organizes an annual conference and several knowledge mobilization activities. In the past year, we also led a major pan-Canadian consultation process on minority Francophone post-secondary studies from June 2021 to March 2022. The final report of that consultation will be launched October 27. There is a full chapter of the report devoted to research and scientific publication in French. I would like to make 3 observations. First, researchers in our institutions work on the periphery of the major research networks. Teaching loads are heavy, graduate students are few, colleagues working in French on similar themes are far away, and English-speaking colleagues do not always understand the subject matter of the research. These contexts limit the opportunities for scientific collaboration, although that would be most beneficial. The second observation is that English is becoming more than ever the lingua franca. In this context, faculty members are increasingly conducting research activities in English. The lack of knowledge of research issues specific to Francophonie can lead to structural and unconscious biases that negatively affect the chances of researchers from Francophone communities to receive funding for their research projects. And thirdly, there are very tight links between the research community and the community itself in Francophone minority communities. While faculty members want to take on the social responsibility of producing data relevant to their communities, they may be pressured by the fact that this type of work is not always recognized by institutions, and they do not always have sufficient resources to take on this responsibility. So to address these challenges, we offer 3 suggestions. We ask that the federal government include provisions to promote the creation and dissemination of scientific information in French in the next action plan for official languages. Such a commitment was made by the federal government in the February 2021 Official Languages Reform document and Bill C-13, which is currently under review and which we hope can be adopted quickly. Positive members that could be considered include, for example, providing funding for the research community to use official languages data from the 2021 census and future data from the survey on the official language minority population, or supporting the dissemination and mobilization of scientific knowledge and the development of French language educational materials adapted to post-secondary programs in Francophone communities. We also ask that the federal government put in place the necessary measures to encourage ICED and granting agencies to support and promote research in French. they could make available funding and programs that better correspond to the needs of post-secondary institutions in minority Francophone context. Granting agencies also need to be supported to avoid reproducing unconscious language bias in the development of programs or initiatives. For example, the Tri-Council Dimensions tool to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Canadian research ecosystem does not identify linguistic minorities as an underrepresented group in research. Finally, we ask that programs supporting the post-secondary sector and official language minority communities allow institutions to apply for support for their long-term activities, including hiring regular faculty members who can train the new generation and obtain funding from granting agencies or institutional support for research. In conclusion, as a reminder, research conducted in French outside of Quebec and research on Francophone and Acadian communities feeds an intellectual life that benefits all of Canadian society, including the Francophone communities themselves and federal institutions that need evidence on official languages in Canada. The federal government must take consistent action to ensure the conditions for the production and dissemination of knowledge in French are equivalent to those of the Anglophone majority. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Director Normand. We appreciate your testimony. Et maintenant, we will go to Professor Annie Pilote for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Bonjour. Good evening. First, I would like to thank Madam Chair, the Honourable Kirsty Duncan, and all committee members for this opportunity to discuss and make recommendations regarding research and publication in French in Canada. This is a topic that is at the heart of the issues facing our research community and at the heart of our work at the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, which I am pleased to represent today as Vice President of its Board of Directors. As the national voice for the humanities and social sciences, our federation supports a diverse community of 91,000 researchers. We actively support French language research in all of our activities, including through the Humanities and Social Sciences Convention, which is the largest academic gathering in Canada, and through a scholarly book funding program that has contributed to the publication of 288 books in French since 2010. During the 2022 Canada-wide consultations on official languages, we highlighted the need for the government to address specific challenges facing Francophone researchers. Access to French language master's and doctoral studies is essential so that Francophones can pursue their education to the highest levels. The presence of Francophone graduate students and postdoctoral fellows is also essential so that teams who wish to conduct research in French can do so in universities across Canada. The government must support the next generation of French language researchers because we need their contribution to better understand the issues facing Francophone communities and to ensure a better future for Canada. According to the ACFA's report entitled Overview and Challenges of French Language Research in the Minority Context in Canada, research in French is in decline. Among the most compelling examples, the report indicates that French language journals represent only 8% of scholarly journals created since the 1960s in Canada, and this number is constantly decreasing. We also see that researchers in Francophone minority communities receive very little support from master's and doctoral students to conduct their research in French, given the limited choice of graduate programs offered in French at their institutions.
Many Francophone students living outside of Quebec find themselves forced to either move to pursue graduate studies in French at larger universities with a wider choice of programs, or to pursue a program in English closer to home. This phenomenon accentuates the dominance of English in the development of their scientific careers and reduces the likelihood that their research will meet the needs of Francophone communities. Increased funding would reduce these inequalities and provide greater support for research in French in Canada, particularly in contexts where the vitality of the French language is weakened. In these circumstances, we wish to make two key recommendations. The first is to increase financial support for graduate studies and postdoctoral fellowships, and the second is to invest in open access publishing in French. We applaud the Science and Research Committee's recommendation to increase the number of graduate and postdoctoral fellowships, as well as to increase their value by 25% and to index them to the Consumer Price Index. However, according to our calculations, only a 48% increase in the value of these awards would be sufficient to account for inflation over the past 2 decades and ensure that they retain their value. Overall, we need to reflect on the issues of equity in the training of the next generation of Francophone researchers. As recommended by ACFAS, we need to ensure that the success rates in funding applications are equivalent for Francophone and Anglophone researchers. Where inequities persist, additional funding or programs, such as research programs on Francophone communities, relocation support for studying in French, can help balance these out. Our second recommendation encourages the government to support open access publishing in French so that research can be found, read, and shared with anyone with Internet access in the world. At present, the channels for disseminating open access research are limited, and this can result in significant barriers to research careers, especially for Francophones. The limited scope of knowledge dissemination, and they can be overlooked by university promotion committees. Therefore, we propose the creation of an open access fund to mitigate the cost of publishing open access books and articles. This fund would include funding for simultaneous open access publication of research in both official languages to cover a wider audience. This will help support a vibrant Francophone research community, increase the dissemination of research conducted in French, and allow the interaction with a broader English-speaking audience. Investing in open access publishing will promote the dissemination of French language research in Canada and around the world, and it will also contribute to a vibrant Francophone research community in the digital age. As a bilingual country, Canada must lead by example. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that researchers in the social sciences and humanities are producing essential research in French. Investing in talent development and open science will help them to increase the impact and reach of their work for the benefit of the community and society at large. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will go to Director Benoit Sevigny for 5 minutes, please.
Bonsoir.
Good evening, members of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. I'm here today on behalf of the Quebec Research Fund, whose CEO is the Chief Scientist of Quebec. There are 3 government agencies that report to the Minister of Science. There's a fund for each sector: social sciences and humanities, health sciences, and national sciences and engineering. There's a relatively similar division with the Federal Research Granting Councils. They have mandates to support research as clusters and reports, support for research training through master's and postdoctoral fellowships, partnership development from local to global, and partnerships including support for dissemination. The English language is now the primary language of science in the world. As data from libraries shows, this trend has been observed for several decades. The Web of Science, which is one of the most reliable global citation databases, shows that between 1980 and 2020, over a period of 40 years, the proportion of articles in French in natural sciences and engineering went from 4% to 0.1% worldwide. It went from 3 to 1% in Canada and from 14% to 0.25% in Quebec. The results of the work by the Canada Research Chair on Transformation in Scholarly Communication, directed by Vincent Larivière of the University of Montreal, point in the same direction when it comes to publications of Quebec researchers in international health science journals. The percentage of publications in French for social science and humanities is slightly higher, but there too is a trend towards anglicization. The proportion of Quebec publications co-authored with at least one scientist from another country has increased by 35%, or from 35% in 2000 to 60% in 2019. In order of importance, the top 3 collaborating countries in Quebec are the U.S., France, and the UK. We are not here to fight science in English, but to better promote science in French and to better promote research and publications in French. Science in French or in any other language is just as important as science in English. English, as a common language, is a common language, but it's based on linguistic diversity. If a language or culture of a region shapes our vision of the world, we must recognize that we have an interest in ensuring that linguistic diversity is reflected in science, in its results and spin-offs. If science in Quebec is considered local in the eyes of the world, its results and spin-offs are, however, important for the people of Quebec, especially in social and sciences and humanities, where the context focuses on the Quebec reality. Science in French can count on a francophone population of 300 million people on 5 continents. That's estimated to be 700 million people by 2050. As a research fund, we promote science in French through our grants and scholarships programs, and particularly through our long-standing support of some 40 scholarly journals in the social sciences and humanities fields, and through the Érudit journal platform. In 2021, we launched a competition to better recognize French language publications, and we award a monthly prize of $2,000. We recently opened the competition to students to encourage the next generation to publish in French. In fact, in 2012, we launched the Relève Étoile Prize, where we award 3 prizes per month to 3 students, 1 per research sector. In the first 24 months of the competition, we observed that the prize was associated with 17 out of 72 publications in French. In the last 24 months, 2021-2022, there are only 2 articles in French out of 72, another indication of the decline of French in science. Quebec's chief scientist is president of the International Network of Governmental Scientific Advice, a network that brings together chief scientists and advisors throughout the world, where English dominates its exchanges. And that's why under his leadership on November 3rd, we have announced the creation of an international francophone research network. We are also organizing a 2-day forum next spring to take talk of the situation to see how we can better promote it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Director Sevigny. And thank you to all our witnesses. This is a really important study, and we're very glad to have your expertise here. We are now going to go to our first round of questions, and we will begin with Mr. Soroka. These are 6-minute rounds. Mr. Soroka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, especially to the 2 that are here in person. It's great to see some people for a change as opposed to seeing everybody on Zoom. As we're going through this study, I'm not opposed to anything we're doing. We're trying to find out how we can create better French, research in Canada. One of my concerns, though, it sounds like because research or science and research is done internationally a lot of times, what are other countries doing to promote the French language? Because as Mr. Cannings even said, in France, they're even changing significantly towards English. So that's what I'm concerned about is what is other countries doing? I'm sure that what we're doing here in Canada will assist, but are the researchers still going to publish in French when internationally they might not get the same kind of awards or recognition as well? So my first question would be to Mr. Normand and Mr. Paulette, Madame, on what's your opinion of that? So whichever one would like to start off first.
I'll start quickly. Thank you for the question. I'd say that Canada shouldn't lag behind other countries. All countries that have a national language other than English are seeking means to ensure that they can perpetuate the production of research in their language. As it was stated in the panel prior to ours, specific knowledge and context is lost if the research isn't conducted in the national language. So other countries are looking for ways to achieve this, and Canada must show leadership in this area, especially as part of the international Francophone community, because Canada is an important player in those circles. It has to confirm and reaffirm the fact that French is an international language, a scientific language, and a language that can be used as part of a scientific diplomacy. Thank you for your question. It goes without saying that it's a difficult trend that we can't counter, but the comparison with France is difficult. France is a country where French is their main language. All of their researchers face the same criteria, but in Canada it's different. Within the Canadian research community, we have two groups of researchers who don't face the same conditions, rules, etc. So we're here facing an issue of equity in Canada to enable Francophone researchers and the up-and-coming researchers, young people who wanted to conduct research in French, to have good conditions to develop and contribute to this basin of knowledge that is so important for their communities, so that they can have an opportunity to disseminate it, not exclusively in French, but also to benefit from conditions that are conditions that aren't weighing on them because of inequity. I mentioned open publishing, but we need to see publication simultaneously in both languages. We don't want scientists to be communicating together in a vacuum. We want this information to be disseminated widely. But communication is such that it's possible to simultaneously release the result of research in both official languages, provided that a translation can be used and make it possible. It's not simply something that should be weighing on people who are conducting their research in French.
I guess that's what I was concerned about, is with our technology today, you wouldn't think this would be such a barrier, and we would be able to have a lot better researchers integrating with one another regardless of the languages they spoke. So I'm surprised that we're having this debate to be some degree, and I'm glad that Bill C-13 will probably take care of a lot of concerns. And it seems like the other people that were asked that question don't need to see any real changes to Bill C-13, so that's good to hear as well. And I'm sure you probably agree that it should be passed and as soon as possible. Mr. Sauvignon, you had mentioned that you also have a Francophone research group that you're working with other countries. Could you elaborate how that will assist us here in Canada to get more publish of Francophone or French research papers here, not only in Canada but worldwide as well, and better recognition?
Oui, vous faites allusion.
You're alluding to an international group? Sorry, I don't understand your question.
Oh, well, you had mentioned that you were part of an international Francophone group, that you were doing a seminar that you were doing. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand that?
Oui, voilà. En fait,
what I did say was Quebec's chief scientist, who is presiding over an international network of government scientific advisors that brings together scientists and advisors. And what they've seen in recent years is that they exchange information in English. Now, this is a network that is more present in the Anglo-Saxon world, but the chief scientist is convinced that talking about science, making people aware of science in their language is important. And that's why he decided to set up a Francophone network, an international Francophone network, so that they would be in a position to advise governments, for example, in French in Francophone countries, in the language of the country.
Okay, that's what I was talking about.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Soroka. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Soroka, for the questions. And now we will go to Monsieur Lauzon for 6 minutes.
For 6 minutes, Good evening. I would like to thank Mr. Normand, Mr. Sévigny, and Ms. Pilote for your presentations. First and foremost, I would like to begin with Mr. Normand. I'm curious about something. You piqued my curiosity when you mentioned translation, the translation of content from outside of Canada. You put the emphasis on the quality of content translated from French towards English. Could you clarify what is the result of a translation of French scientific research when it is translated toward English to disseminate it in other countries?
Tout à fait ce que j'essaie.
That is exactly what I was trying to express. So there are 2 points. It's not so much the translation of a French text towards English that is problematic. Rather, it is when someone decides to work in English, to publish their work in large journals to reach a wider audience, they change their subject matter. So they're not working on a subject matter that is as relevant to the unique needs of a small community. But it is published in a large journal. But these journals are, even though they're very prestigious, are not widely read. So the impact on the pertinence to the local community is deteriorated. And that's why it's important not to lose the specificity of researchers who are working in French. But I would like to add something on translation. There's also an issue in certain disciplines, even when you have researchers in French who publish in English, the English colleagues will not cite them or will not read them. There's very specific data. Even when French colleagues don't work in French, their English colleagues do not read their publications. And we were talking about how research communities can sometimes work in silos. That's also a problem. But research by Francophone researchers is perceived to be on less pertinent topics.
Okay, je peux comprendre.
I can understand that. Okay. Mr. Sévigny, at the Quebec Research Fund, you mentioned better valuing French publications, but you never made reference to Bill C-13 on the Official Languages Act. Do you favor or do you support C-13? And do you think it would meet your goal, help meet your goal? Answer. I'm not very familiar with Bill C-13, but yes, I do believe it could be beneficial to scientific research in French. Question. You also piqued my curiosity with the award that you mentioned, because many witnesses have spoken to us about the importance of recognizing French research work. Can you tell me further? You mentioned $2,000 per prize. Can you talk to me further about the consequences, that what comes downstream after these prizes, and what could be done to enhance that service? Answer. Well, the Next Generation Star Prize, which was recently created, was in order to congratulate work done in a next generation researcher's career. It is a competition that works very well. Prizes are given 3 times per month to students based on what we observe. And the work that is submitted to adjudication committees is more in English than in French. So we are seeing this transition towards English on the part of the students. In the case of French publications, this has been more recent. We saw last year that the chief scientists put in place the awards competition for Francophone work. And this was to encourage students to write and publish their work in French, and to open this opportunity to students and also to researchers across Canada and the Francophonie. Thank you very much. Ms. Pilote, I didn't forget you. According to my research, there are 4 companies that make up over 40% of the market of publications, and we know them well. Springer Nature, Willie Backwealth, Taylor and Francis, and one other. In your opinion, what is the impact of this market concentration in Francophone publications in Canada? Well, we know that those 4 companies account for 40% of the market. Ms. Pilote, we can't hear you. Oh, yes, I was reflecting on your question. Well, our proposal is to move away from publication in this business of French language publication to better foster open access publications. We believe that the future of French language publications must be through open access. The only obstacle there is funding, to be able to put measures in place to allow researchers to reach the general public so that they can
interrupt Professor Pilote. Thank you very much, Monsieur Lezon. And with that, we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Joncar for 6 minutes.
For 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to say hello to our witnesses for the second hour of testimony this evening. My question is for Ms. Pilote. I find it's interesting the idea that you're bringing about for open access publications. I would like to look at the other side of this argument. Sylvie Lamoureux, who's the research chair in linguistic management, another witness, told us that Érudit, the platform, is also very beneficial for the recognition of scientific publications in French in Canada and also abroad. But there are limits to this because the existence itself of scholarly articles in Canada is precarious, and its readership is limited. So for this open access platform, which would be available both in English and French, is linked to this question that witness brought up. She said that in the French language, there is a unique way of thinking. And so how can open access help enhance publications in French in Canada? Answer. I don't have all the answers on what form an open access platform could take. I know that we have to look into these new types of solutions and use them to contribute toward promoting publication. You're right when you say that it's not just a matter of translation. We have to foster points of contact between different milieus of thought that often remain in silos. Often the translation of ideas is done very awkwardly from one language to the next. And this is important for researchers when they're looking for funding, when they're looking to be recognized for their work. They're going to want to cite the best writers possible. And often they fall back on researchers from their own silo. So we want to find ways to transcend the boundaries of these milieus of knowledge and make it possible for communities to intersect, even though they might not be intersecting right now. Thank you very much. And can you give us more details? How does language influence the research produced? Answer. As Professor Lamoureux was saying, language is how we vehiculate our thoughts. So talking about equity, Francophone researchers who are subject to conditions where they have to think and write and organize their work in a different environment that isn't their mother tongue environment, that has an impact on their work, and it also has an impact on the research topics they choose. So this has a great impact on the next generation, for example. It makes it hard for new generation researchers to appropriate topics that have a link to their language. And as I said, it goes above and beyond words. a language represents an entire way of viewing the world. Thank you very much. And other than the Open Access Fund that you mentioned in your speech, what other specific measures could be put in place at the federal government to help social sciences and humanities researchers, especially Francophone ones? Well, it's certainly necessary to help researchers publish the fruits of their research. But if they're not able to produce or to conduct that research in the first place, then they won't have anything to communicate. So the funding is very important, and it needs to be invested right from master's and postgraduate studies. I have another question now for Mr. Normand. What could the federal government do to better support researchers in Quebec and the rest of Canada? Well, Ms. Pilote put us on a good train of thought there. It's important to work with funding councils. Yes, on the matter of funding, but also on the matter of fair evaluation for funding applications that are submitted. In the past weeks, we worked with the CIHR on training modules for subconscious bias. For example, are there structural biases in the way that the evaluator is perceiving the application before them? So we're looking into linguistic biases and how they can be corrected through different tools. So those tools need to be provided to many more entities than just the CIHR. All the funding agencies require them. But the skills of the language skills of the people who evaluate these funding applications are self-evaluated. So they decide how well they speak their second language. So they might not understand the research proposal. However, if that application were to go to a different evaluator, it could be interpreted in a much different way. Thank you. So have you ever thought about quotas? For example, we've seen it with Telefilm Canada for audiovisual productions, and it's also done at the Canada Council for the Arts and for Literature. I'm sorry.
6 minutes. Perhaps you would like to ask if someone would like to table an answer for you.
Je vais prendre la question par écrit.
I will ask for that answer to be tabled in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Blanchet-Chancas. And with that, we will now go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thanks again to the witnesses for being here with us. I want to turn to Monsieur Sevigny to get back to this question of publishing in the lingua franca of English and all that flows from that. It seems to be one of the underlying issues here. And I just, first of all, Monsieur Sevigny, could you just repeat the data you had for the 40-year trends in publication in French and English from France and Canada? I was trying to rapidly write that down, and I got bogged down.
Oui, certainement.
Yes, certainly. The reference is the Web of Science, where it's shown that over the last 40 years, from 1980 to 2020, the proportion of social sciences, humanities, and engineering publications has decreased to 0.1% in French. And in Quebec, it is now at 0.25 percentage point, down from 10% in Quebec.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering then, and I've heard various suggestions here how we might turn that around with open access, simultaneous translation, having various countries of the Francophonie, I guess, cooperate in promoting this. But if if it seems that, for instance, publication of scientific articles in France has essentially gone to zero in French and it's all in English, I'm just wondering whether we should be concentrating on the other aspects of this in terms of funding, finding ways of funding programs in French and supporting those French programs. And I guess perhaps, again, one more question to you, Monsieur Sévigny, because you're sort of associated with the funding councils, how should we be assessing the strength or power of the science behind the various applicants because traditionally, as I assume, it's largely done through the publication record, and part of that record is citations, and citations is all about who's reading your work and who's citing it, and that seems to be circling around English now. And is there other ways that we should be looking at that, and is there discussions about how to change that? Because you talked about, or somebody talked about unconscious bias or subconscious bias, and that this is even a conscious bias, I think, if we're talking about citations of English articles, basically.
J'ai peut-être
I have perhaps a start of an answer for you. Research funds are associated with the San Francisco Declaration. So the idea is one of assessing the weight that high-impact journals should play. Now, this is something that comes into a question for candidacies, and up-and-coming researchers are sending us the same message. A research career has several components. Dissemination needs to be focused on as well, and it not just these high-impact journals. So that could be a bit of an answer to encourage people to publish in French, but to recognize more of these journals as well.
Okay, I'd just turn to Professor Pilote and Monsieur Normand to comment on that. Should we be looking at the publication record so much if that seems to have gone so much to English throughout the Francophonie, not just in Canada? In fact, in my Google searches, I've come across comments on the web that says if you want to find articles in French and about scientific articles in French, the best place to look for it is in Canadian journals, because we do more of it than France. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that. Should we be concentrating on the publication side?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. May I answer? Well, I'd like to add on to what Mr. Sévigny was saying. The San Francisco Declaration includes a number of answers. We need to change the research culture in Canada, not just for research in French, but undoubtedly that would help if we could broaden the criteria for the quality of research and take into account the spin-offs of research as well. Thank you.
Professor Pilote, thank you, and thank you to Mr. Cannings. We will now go to the 5-minute round, and it's a very collegial committee, and I understand the Conservatives have been very gracious and have given their 5 minutes to Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap for 5 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente, je vais y aller tout de suite.
Well, thank you very much, and I've got some questions for Mr. Sévigny, and last November, the Quebec government announced that it would be funding a service for assistance for research in French, as proposed in a report of 2021. Can you tell us why it's important for the Quebec government to put in place this program. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that program. Okay, well then we'll change topics. With respect to research in French in Quebec, can you tell me more about the place of English in research in Quebec, even in a primarily French environment? Well, in fact, our research funds acknowledge two linguistic communities, Anglophone and Francophone, with McGill University, Concordia. In terms of publications, well, it's very clear in natural sciences and engineering, but there are many more in social sciences and humanities. There are some 40. With respect to research, applications for funding show that an increasingly large number are coming in drafted in English. The summary and the title must be in French. However, people are prepared or are authorized to draft the document in the language of their choice. Well, then it's a setback. Would you say that there's a setback when it comes to research in French in Quebec? Answer, I would say yes, there is less research in French in Quebec in terms of publications. Question, well, can you tell us then if any action is being put in place as part of the research funds in order to promote the publication of research in French? Answer, well, that's what we did with the Publication in French prize. When you look at the numbers that we have and the trends, what we want to do is encourage the scientific community to draft more and to publish more in the journals in French. So that's one of the initiatives that we took. And next spring, we're organizing a 2-day forum, as I said, to discuss these issues with our partners to see how we can enhance the value of publishing in French. Question, well, you talked about a reduced number of productions in French. It's some 5 to 12% of these applications that come in French. However, researchers in French represent some 21% Canada-wide. Are you seeing the same type of situation occur in the province of Quebec? Well, I couldn't tell you. We're looking at applications, and so I couldn't answer that now. But what I could say is that Quebec, when it comes to competing at the federal level, is winning some 27% of the applications that it puts in, even though it doesn't represent 27% of the population. Well, thank you, Mr. Sevigny. I'd like to go ask a question of Mr. Normand. I'd like to hear you expand on the issue of quotas in the granting councils for the publication of research in French. Well, without talking about quotas, I could say there have been specific programs for research in French for my linguistic minority communities, and that enabled people to obtain funding for specific amounts. Now, when those envelopes disappeared, those researchers had a great deal of difficulty in funding their research. So that's one measure that could have been expanded. But recently, steps have been taken to ensure that the success of applications is equal to the number of applications that's part of the overall applications. Now, it's all fine and well to encourage people to apply in French. The success rate is a lot lower than in other categories that and there are other groups also that need funding, and the Indigenous communities, researchers on women researchers, etc. So there are a number of measures that are taken into account for each time that there is a competition. And so that's a first step. We need to ensure that there is an equivalent level of success rate. Yes, Mr. Normand.
Monsieur Blanchet. I'm sorry, it's the end of the 6 minutes. Before we go to Ms. Bradford, I just want to say to our witnesses how grateful we are. As you can see, you have a very interested committee. And we will now go to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes, please. Ms. Bradford? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our witnesses on this very important topic. So, Director Sevigny, in the spring of 2021, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research reported an average grant amount for applications submitted in French as to be $394,559, while the overall average grant size was $770,000. So are you aware of any further data related to potential differences in the size of grants and awards between English and French research? Director Sevigny?
Je vous dirais, en fait.
Well, I'd say that when it comes to research funds from Quebec, I don't have the data that enables me to see whether people do better in English or French. There are many more in French, but all I can do is talk about the situation in Quebec and not the federal granting councils.
So apart from the language of submission, are there any other differences between the types of proposals submitted in French and those submitted in English, such as the area of research, duration, researcher qualifications, experience or amount requested? Maybe some of these things are impacting the substantial difference?
J'avoue, je ne saurais vous répondre.
I couldn't answer that question. I can't tell you whether there is more context. I can't say. I think when it comes to health sciences and engineering, there's more consistency. But with respect to the language of the application, is there a distinction? Well, I don't know. I really can't answer that question.
Okay, Professor Pilate, in your institution, are there specific resources dedicated to supporting research in French?
Vous parlez de mon institution universitaire?
My university or the Federation?
Moi, je suis professeure à...
Well, I'm a professor at Laval, so of course Laval places a great deal of importance on research in French. It is the oldest French university. It's very important for the university, but like all university, there is a lot of pressure to produce in English. There are factors, impacts, and we are also seeing this trend in our institution, even though we are very much aware of the importance of encouraging research in French.
Okay. Director Normand, under Part 7 of the Official Languages Act, the federal institutions have a duty to ensure that positive measures are taken with a view to enhancing the vitality of the English and French linguistic minority communities and supporting their development and fostering full recognition of use of both English and French. What measures have the granting councils put in place to promote the scientific publications and research in French under the OLA?
Ben, je vous dirais que dans les dernières années,
Well, in recent years, what we've seen, on the contrary, is a disappearance of positive measures as part of the granting councils. In the early 2010, there was a program at the RSC that was abolished. It took some 10 years before something came back as part of the CIHR, and so that's why we're calling for some changes. with the changes to the Official Languages Act. We're calling for a renewal of those positive measures by the granting councils to ensure that there is equitable funding for research in French. And this is another important aspect. Research that's being done in colleges, there are adapted programs. It's different from university research.
There are needs for evidence all across minority Francophone communities and also within federal institutions, which must take positive measures to support these communities. And without that data and that evidence, communities can't make specific enough requests, and also the federal government is not sufficiently equipped. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Professor Normand.
His job is interrupting, and I'm really sorry. Dear colleagues, and to our wonderful witnesses, we have come to the end of our time together. I want to really say thank you to all of you for presenting. This is an important study for this committee, and we're grateful for your time and expertise. We hope it was a good experience for you and that you may come back in the future. And with that, colleagues, we say thank you to our witnesses. We will briefly suspend because we have one more panel tonight. Thank you all. Suspended. J'aimerais faire quelques
I would like to raise a few points for the benefit of our new witnesses. Before speaking, please wait for me to recognize you by name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Regarding interpretation, for those who are on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between Floor, which is the original language, English or French. For those who are in the room, you may use the earpiece and choose the channel you wish. I would like to remind all members and witnesses that comments must be addressed through the chair.
To welcome all our witnesses. We are so delighted to have you. Appearing as an individual, we have Sharif Mata, Professor, Mount St. Vincent University. And from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, we have Dr. Marc Fortin, Vice President, Research, Grants, and Scholarships Directorate. And we will hear from each of our witnesses for 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will put up this green card. It will let you know you have 30 seconds left. And again, we'd like to welcome our witnesses. Thank you for joining us on this important study. And we begin with Professor Mata for 5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Les honorables membres du comité.
Honorable committee members of the Standing Committee on Science and Research, and Madam Chair, thank you for inviting me to testify on research and publication in French in Canada. First, let me summarize my experience on the basis of which I will testify today. My research is primarily in theoretical quantum chemistry. I am full professor and chair of the Department of Chemistry and Physics at Mount St. Vincent University in Nova Scotia. I have just finished a 4-year term as a member and then past chair of the Interdisciplinary Adjudication Committee of the Canada Research Chairs Program, CRC. I currently serve as a member of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Society for Chemistry, and I am a member of the ACFAS Acadie as a regional representative for Nova Scotia under the leadership of Professor Selma Zayan Galia, the president of our committee. With that said, to be clear, in this testimonial, I do not invoke the authority of any institution or organization. I testify as an individual and speak in my own name. Centuries ago, the lingua franca of science was Latin, the linguistic ancestor of French and of all Romance languages. Sir Isaac Newton himself chose Latin rather than his native English when he wrote his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Today, English is the lingua franca of science, but this is relatively recent. It began with the emergence of the United States as a world superpower after World War II. Before that, it was commonplace to publish in other languages. For example, the 4 papers of Albert Einstein in 1905, and even articles by Schrödinger and Max Planck, where the foundations of quantum mechanics were erected. Also, Louis Pasteur, Henri Poincaré, Marie Curie, and many others published in French. A couple of years ago, I came across a beautiful paper by Alain Aspect. And it was just announced that he is the co-recipient of the Physics Nobel Prize for 2022 for his work on quantum entanglement, which underpins all quantum computing technologies. He published this article in the prestigious, and I do say prestigious, but it is seldom cited, a journal, the BUP, the Physicists Union Bulletin. But this is not an isolated instance. In fact, a large number of Francophone physicists and chemists, including several Nobel laureates, including Louis de Broglie, appeared in the bulletin over its 120-year history. And this does show the first-rate scientists do publish in the French language. So why do they publish in French? Well, in my opinion, language as a vehicle of thought does influence the way you think. You're influenced by your cultural heritage that is associated with the language and its nuances and modes of reasoning. Do you really need to understand the words to recognize a Cuban piece of music, an Argentinian tango, or a Greek or Russian piece of folkloric music? The music phraseology emerges from the logistic culture in which it is embedded. And the same is true for other domains of intellectual work. The limit of your language is the limit of your knowledge, as argued by Ludwig Wittgenstein. I would like to make a few practical suggestions, which I cannot imagine are totally original, to enhance scholarship in the French language in Canada. For example, earmarking an adequate budgetary quota for submissions in French to the 3 agencies of the Tri-Council of Canada. This would bridge the gaps by those who do not master the necessary language sufficiently. Also, I would like to suggest opening up the eligibility to scholarships presently restricted to Canadians. Also, treating French in the same way as we treat equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I can speak further to this point during the question period. I'm sorry
to interrupt. It's the worst part of this job, but I know our colleagues will be keen to ask you questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now we will go to Dr. Marc Fortin for 5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good evening. I am the Vice President of the Research Grants and Scholarship Directorate at the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, or NSERC. NSERC is a federal research funding agency. It supports 11,000 of Canada's best researchers every year and also provides scholarships and fellowships to students and postdoctoral fellows. Each year, NSERC invests about $1 billion in research and in the next generation of innovators.
Research Council of Canada, we support research and talent in both official languages. Applicants choose a language they want to use with us. NSERC has the capabilities to assess applications in both English and French. 99% of our personnel meets the language requirements of their position. 100% of our literature, of our instructions, of our guides are published in both languages. NSERC also recruits external scientific experts to assess the scientific excellence of the grant applications that are submitted to us. They provide advice, NSERC with advice on the excellence of the research grant applications. Every evaluation committee we form has the ability to assess applications in French and in English. Over 10 years of data of our selection committees, 26% of the membership of those expert committees are francophones, and 45% of the membership is bilingual. Madam Chair, NSERC has the people, the expertise, and the processes to fairly assess the merit of grant applications regardless of the language they are written in. Despite having those capabilities at NSERC, only 10% of the applications we receive on average, are submitted in French. Some have suggested that researchers may not submit their grant applications in French because they fear the granting councils may not process them fairly. The data does not support that view. For example, grant applications submitted in French from McGill University or the University of Ottawa have, on average, a higher success rate compared to applications submitted by the same universities in English. Applications from other universities show different trends, and sometimes the opposite of what I just mentioned here. The success rate is influenced by many factors, likely more closely linked to the demographic context of the institution and also the support provided by the institution for French language grant applications, amongst other factors. Alors, l'anglais, comme mentionné auparavant, est la langue dominante.
As was mentioned earlier, English is the dominant language in research throughout the world. In Canada and at NSERC, we must, however, maintain our current procedures that allow us to evaluate applications for funding in both languages and to ensure that there is no bias in the evaluation of applications. NSERC is proactive, and I'll emphasize the word proactive in promoting the importance of science to Canada's francophones. We have 2 annual science promotion campaigns, Odyssey and Science Literacy Week, in which francophones are actively involved. Its partners in Quebec have offered to more than 450 activities to promote science in French. In addition, NSERC provided funding to nearly 30 francophone organizations to organize science promotion activities in French. In summary, NSERC is able to assess applications for funding in both official languages and has found no tendency towards systemic discrimination in the evaluation, whether the applications come in French or English. We want to work with universities to combat the perception that it's more difficult to get funding if the application is submitted in French. We can work together to support the efforts of researchers who want to do research in French. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your attention.
Dr. Fortin, we are so pleased to have you and Professor Mata for this third panel tonight. We welcome you. We thank you for joining us. And I should have welcomed tonight. We have guests appearing with members with us, including Ben Laub and Sonia Sidhu. So we welcome both of them. And I understand that Mr. Laub will begin the round of questioning for 6 minutes. Mr. Laub, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Long time no see. And unfortunately for you, I guess I'm going to be a permanent member of this committee. So you're stuck with me. You're stuck with me. But Kirsty and I go way back many parliaments ago when we sat together on Veterans Affairs Committee. So those were the good old days, maybe. Mr. Fortin, thank you for appearing, and Mr. Mata, the same. You heard much testimony, I guess, over the last 2 hours from different people with their different points of view. I don't think they were really attacking NSERC or the granting councils that fall under NSERC, but I'm not going to say everybody runs in the same circles, but you know, the university and academic bunch kind of do run in the same circles, and you would know a lot of them through the years. Where's the disconnect here? Because it seems to me you guys meet at conferences or could talk in a room and get this all figured out in a day. So where's the disconnect that we have to do a study on this? Or is there one? Mr. Fortin, please.
Is there one? Is there a disconnect? I think we're all seeing the same data. I mean, the data speaks for itself. There is a decrease of publication in French. We only see at NSERC, and I can only speak for NSERC, I cannot speak for SSHRC, the social sciences and the health sciences granting councils, but for NSERC, we only see, as I mentioned, 10% of the grant applications being submitted to us in French. So I think there's a consensus that there's a decrease in the presence of French in the research world. There are many things that we can do, as I mentioned in my remarks, collectively. One of the other witnesses earlier today mentioned the San Francisco Declaration, the DORA Declaration, Declaration. To demystify this is an approach that decreases the emphasis put on the impact factor of journals, and typically English language journals have much higher impact factors. So NSERC is going the direction of, has adopted the DORA principles, and we're in the process of putting that in place, where research grant applications will be assessed with a different lens from the traditional impact factor kind of lens. So this is one action. We need to continue our work at promoting science in French. As I said, we are doing activities. We could do more. We need more funds to do that. We need to demystify this notion with the data. I presented you a very small slice of data tonight, but we can continue to demystify the notion that the success rates are different at NSERC when grant applications are submitted in French or in English.
These people that are applying for these grants, they should be very confident. They're very smart. They're very accomplished to have made it through their undergrad and their master's degree or their PhD or multiple degrees. So it would seem to me that they would not be intimidated into doing it in English. If their mother tongue was French, it must be their own personal preference. Is that what I'm to take from this, is that they are choosing to submit or do or publish in English versus French? Like, it seems to me like it would be a conscious choice, not one of fear. Am I right or wrong there?
Perhaps I can relate my own personal experience. Before joining the public service, I spent most of my career as a professor at McGill University. I'm obviously a francophone. I was doing work in molecular genetics. And I submitted my grant applications in English because I did not have the support from my institution to translate my grant applications into French. The reason I was writing them in English is simply because all the products that were coming out of my research lab, my research group, by products I mean publications, thesis, were in English. So I would copy-paste, assemble a grant application because the products were available to me, and I did not have support from my institution to operate differently.
It's a very bilingual university. Is that still the case today, or have times changed? I'm guessing you probably graduated in 2000 or something. So has times changed? Do you know, or?
I don't think I can answer that question.
Okay.
I've left McGill 17 years ago.
Okay, well, I was close then. I was close. Okay. The other point that kind of struck me is you got Ottawa U is a bilingual university, and University of Moncton, I think, is considered a bilingual university. But the one presenter was from, I think, the University of Alberta, right? And so what are the expectations of bilingual universities where it's very bilingual communities versus, I know there's French communities in Alberta, but what should the expectation be of the government, of the taxpayer, to try and provide a similar structure in Alberta versus, Montreal or Ottawa or Moncton, New Brunswick?
Well, we will, of course, and welcome applications in either language, in French or in English. Again, it goes back to institutional support for researchers that varies greatly, and this is what the data tells us at NSERC. Different institutions have different success rates in French or in English. So that seems to be an important factor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lobb. And
not just we désolé. No.
Dr. Fortet, we're going to be glad to have you back, Mr. Lobb. And I owe an apology to Mr. Mazer, who I understand is also joining us tonight. So my apologies there. We will now go to Ms. Diab for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. and welcome to our committee this evening. Welcome to Ottawa from Nova Scotia. He's from my riding. I have a question, a twofold question, in fact. You organized a large conference in 2019. It was the 45th anniversary of an event. So that's my first question. I'd like you, and I'll put both questions out first of all because I don't have a lot of time. You said today that you are co-organizing something for 25 on LACFAS, a symposium that will focus on various disciplines. So could you tell us about the two conferences that you're participating in organizing? Well, thank you. Thank you, Madame Diab. For the first part of your question, on the Chitel question conference, it's the conference of chemists, theoreticians of Latin speaking, whether it be Romanian speakers, Spanish speakers of the Latin languages. So it's a large conference, a prestigious international conference that takes place each year. It's an annual conference, except during COVID, of course. And it was attended by all groups except Canada up until 2019, when we organized it with two of my colleagues. We organized the conference, and all presentations, whether they're oral or in writing, are in a Latin language. Now, someone can speak English, there's no discrimination, but the vast majority of the presentations were in French and in Spanish, the two dominant languages of the conference, with great roots in Central America, Spain. At any rate, from what I heard, it was highly successful. And the linguistic importance was measurable. There were many Canadian francophones from places like Saskatchewan, for example. A student there won a prize for the best presentation. And it emphasized the importance of talking about science in Latin languages. And you'd be surprised to learn that it was possible to attend a seminar in Romanian, and you'd be surprised because it was interesting. So that was the first one. The second one that we're organizing, that you mentioned, for 2025, is a conference on various disciplines. The philosopher who developed this philosophy was a researcher at the CNRS in France. He was a Romanian national, and he pushed this area, this field, where researchers try to focus on what various disciplines have in common, instead of trying to simply focus on dealing with a common problem.
So this is a transgression of a discipline. It transcends unidisciplinarity. So it brings together or rather, we bring together artists, poets, mathematicians, and there are artist mathematicians who perform or create their art on the basis of math. And I think the 6 minutes are almost up, but I could give you examples. For example, math that's used in scholarships is very similar to statistical science, which is the basis of thermodynamics, which dictate the laws of thermodynamics based on underlying principles of physics, and this is the same scientific principles. Mr. Mata, we just have a few seconds. You were giving us a few practical suggestions. Can you talk to us about EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as regards to French?
I'm sorry to interrupt. That is your 6 minutes. Perhaps you would like to ask Professor Mata to table his answer.
OK. Merci. Oui.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Diab. And now we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Joncar for 6 minutes.
For 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions will be for Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, in your speech, you mentioned that only 10% of applications that you receive at NSERC are in French. We know that the proportion of francophones is much higher in Canada. So what explains the fact that there are so few applications submitted in French? There is not one single answer or one single factor. As I mentioned, at NSERC, we're making every effort to ensure that the evaluation of applications is equitably done. And I say so humbly. I believe that the numbers show that given that we see distinctions between the universities, it's not very likely that the discrepancies are because of NSERC processes, because the processes are the same. They're applied across institutions in English or in French. And so we're seeing different factors, and there's not just one factor. Yes, there is the matter of encouraging master's and doctoral careers in French. There is it's necessary to encourage publication in French. It's important to demystify rates of success, which I mentioned before. There's also the CIHR and NSERC and the SSHRC. So these are 3 agencies, and there's still work to do. One witness mentioned earlier training to eliminate subconscious biases, and this is something we're already implementing. We are already implementing it, but we can do more. I don't believe that there is one single cause or factor to explain this. I mentioned several hundred activities that we do to encourage publications in French, but of course we could always do more. I understand what you're saying, and you're saying that in your organization there's absolutely no subconscious bias against French. It's all external factors, and that's what explains the fact that only 10% of applications are in French at your organization currently. Answer: well, I would say that there are a multitude of factors, and not just one organization is responsible for this observation. And we also see it internationally, isn't that true? Question: at NSERC, do you have data to show the success rate between French applications and English applications? Of course. Can you share them with us? I have some, because I'm giving you this example, and we know that it's striking. The success rate in the CIHR is 10% lower in French compared to in English. And is this also true across all funding agencies in Canada? If we look at a 10-year period up until 2009 until 2018, on average for all NSERC programs, when we looked deeper, we saw different data that were different among different programs. But if we look at all the programs together, we see an average success rate in French of 73%, and the average success rate for all NSERC applications is 66%. So, as I said, different programs will sometimes have the opposite trend. So we are near to a different an equal rate. So if we look at the demographic representation, this rate is still low. And we have heard at the committee that researchers are concerned and they lack trust. So do you think that there's work that needs to be done to address this lack of trust and to encourage applications being submitted in French? Answer. This is exactly what I was saying earlier. It's necessary to demystify that concern about a lower success rate in French. Because what we're seeing, in fact, is a slightly higher success rate for French applications across all programs. And are there measures taken by NSERC to deconstruct this belief system against applications sent in French? Answer. Yes, there's always work left to be done, and we're always pleased to work hand in hand with stakeholders on this demystification effort, but I'm sure more can always be done. Question. Federal government support and support from your organization and other funding agencies, have they all taken measures to better understand why this 10% is the number? Answer, yes. I'm not sure about all the research that has been done, but this is a topic of conversation that comes up very frequently. And at NSERC, we question ourselves on every action we take on every new program we set up to make sure there is no bias. We do not have a monopoly on truth, but we take constant efforts on this front.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca. Thank you to all our witnesses. We're very grateful for everyone being here. And now we will go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I'll continue with Dr. Fortin. We've heard of some of the biases. We've heard of perhaps a bias around the impact scores. And you mentioned DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. Is that what it is? Something like the San Francisco Declaration, which I believe, I don't know, is about 10 years old, but perhaps is only being implemented now in various institutions around the world. But you said that NSERC was changing its methods along those lines. So I just wondered how long have you been doing this, and has there been a change in what you've seen in terms of how different programs score?
So NSERC and the other two granting agencies, SSHRC and CIHR, have signed on onto DORA, I think 2 or 3 years ago. Don't quote me, but something like this. So it's fairly recent. So there's 2 elements that are important for the implementation of DORA. One, and it may seem trivial, but we need to change our IT systems to be able to receive curriculum vitae from researchers in a very different format. That seems trivial. That's something we're working on. But most importantly, there's a discussion to be had, a conversation to be had with the research community. Because if we change what we reward and what we value at NSERC, and hence who gets grants, it actually has an impact on tenure and promotion in institutions, in universities across the country. So we must collectively evolve that culture of previously focused on impact factors. And when we focus on impact factors, there is I don't know if it's an unconscious bias, but there's a bias towards English language journals. So we must change that conversation and allow narratives, not just list of publications, but narratives where the applicant can put forward his or her career path that may be a different career path, maybe a career path in French, may allow that narrative space may allow the applicant to explain why he or she has chosen to publish in French, which may impact the impact factor. We're in the process of changing the curriculum vitae, but it's a systemic culture change that needs to happen. And culture doesn't change overnight. We all know this. It's going to take some time before we have a significant impact on those. But I'm hopeful. When I look at what we've achieved in the EDI discussions, we haven't solved it, but we've made, I believe, some progress. The conversations are not the same today as they were 5 years ago. So I hope that 5 years from now, we can have conversations about careers in French that will be different from what we have today.
But so in short, you're still working on that process, and so we don't have any data from the changes because they haven't really occurred. But no, it's good to hear that that's happening. We've also heard some discussions around open access publications and how that might influence French research. When I think of open access scientific publications, to me, it means that I can access them free of charge. I can read them without having a subscription or a library card at a university. Maybe you or Dr. Matta could also comment on how open access could affect this?
And sir, the question of open access is a challenging one. There's a whole business enterprise around scientific publications. An earlier witness talked about the big publishers, the Elsevier's and Springer's of the world. It's changing a paradigm from that system that has been in place for decades, half a century, I don't know, to a different paradigm of open access. There are still debates about who will incur the costs of this, because it's open access for the reader, but it's not free for people who want to publish. So there's still quite a bit of debate around who's going to pay for this, how we will support that. At the end of the day, again, it's linked to this conversation, this culture change conversation about recognizing different forms of publications, different forms of achievements, not just publications, scientific publications in journals, but achievements. We were talking about science promotion activities that we support. We want to recognize this when we assess researchers, that if they have been active in promoting science in French, that this becomes a significant contribution that is valued and rewarded in our system. And that's...
Thank you so much, Mr. Cannings. Thank you, Dr. Fortin. I'm sorry to interrupt. And as I said, it's a collegial committee, so it's my understanding our conservative colleagues have ceded their time to Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais retourner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Fortin. You said that the success rate for applications in French is higher than average. Do you have any data with respect to the amounts of the grants? I'll give you an example. The Institute for Research said that the average amount was 50% lower for French applications than in English for 2021. I don't have data with me here this evening, but I'd be more than happy to provide the data with the committee. I doubt that it would be 50% of the total, but I would be more than happy to present the data. I don't have it with me tonight. Are there other characteristics that could explain why Francophone researchers are producing applications in English? Anything you can point out? Well, there's the issue of perception of the capacity of the evaluating committee to assess an application in French. There are also personal choices. I mentioned my own experience. Support by institutions. I think it becomes an issue for each researcher. It would be wonderful to work with the groups to highlight the figures that we mentioned earlier, to explain how we process files in French. It's always a pleasure for us to explain that. At NSERC, has anyone ever talked about quotas? It exists at the Canada Council, at Telefilm Canada. Could there be quotas because the demographic weight of Francophones isn't being reflected at present? I think that's something you need to ask of researchers because we accept applications in English or French. Are researchers prepared to accept this idea of a quota? But from your perspective as a member, as someone from the Granting Council, have you ever thought about this? Is it considered something positive? Is it, if we look at it from that perspective, it's done in other federal organizations. From your, in your opinion, has the organization ever thought about this? Well, it's an interesting issue because support provided at NSERC was provided to institutions and not to the researchers. So the idea of building an institutional capability for that, well, is it an initiative? Again, I have to be careful here. I don't believe that any single measure would help. It needs to be a collective group of efforts, a series of measures. And as part of a series of measures, we would be more than happy to work with the community to support research in French. Now, I can see that you're trying to say that there are a number of initiatives, but what we're hearing from researchers is publish in English or die. It's publishing in French has a negative connotation. There's a decline, a very sharp decline. I'm trying to look at how at NSERC we could reverse that trend. Now, the government has already acknowledged that there's a decline in French, period. The number of applications in French is 50% lower than the demographic weight of Francophones, and that's serious. Absolutely. It's not a matter we take lightly at all. As I mentioned, as part of each program, we are careful. We try to be aware of the unconscious bias, and we continue to promote science in Francophone communities. There's been analysis of your organization showing that there is an imbalance. Only 10% of Francophones will apply to NSERC in French. We continually conduct analysis of each program. We look at statistics, be it a regional issue, a linguistic issue. We scrutinize each and every program from all of these perspectives. Thank you, Dr. Fortin.
Madame la Présidente, je me
Madam Chair, Mr. Fortin, if you have any additional data for us with respect to what you were going to say. So if there are some recommendations, some reports, then
You want to table it, but your time is up. We have to be fair to everyone. And with that, we will go to Monsieur Lauzon for 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Monsieur Lauzon?
Mr. Lauzon?
We can't hear you, Monsieur Lauzon. Can you try again?
Monsieur
We're
Lauzon,
trying
si
on
vous
our
pouvez
end.
chercher le bouton.
Mr. Lauzon? It's the button on the headset.
Mr. Clerk?
As we work to fix it, we do have the option, perhaps we could suspend for a couple minutes while we...
I think we will, thank you, Mr. Clerk. I think we will suspend till we can get this working.
Okay, now can you hear me now?
We've got you, Mr. Lauzon.
Yeah,
for
I
5
changed my
minutes,
headset,
please.
so I have another one there.
Thank you, Monsieur Lauzon, for 5
Sorry
minutes,
about
please.
this. So this is the new technology. I use the old one. Bon, ben merci beaucoup. Merci, monsieur.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses. This is a very interesting issue. I'd like to go to Mr. Martin. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the context that you gave us around research in French. We learned a great deal today. And you talked about the superpower, the United States. I'd like to know what the impact is of these what is the impact of our people here? Why are people publishing solely in English because of the superpower in the United States? If you could elaborate on that, please, I would appreciate it. Well, I'd like to change the angle of your question, if I may, Mr. Lauzon. Oh, go ahead, go ahead. Well, I think it's a counterweight. As a counterweight, we need to align with all of the Francophone countries when it comes to our culture and scientific publications, with France, Belgium, Francophone Africa, Switzerland. As a colleague mentioned earlier in the previous panel, there are many millions of Francophones throughout the world. I don't know the exact figure, but there's a critical mass that can be a counterweight, can counterbalance the Anglophone influence. It's not a battle. It's not to counter it, but it's a joining of forces with our European and African counterparts to produce a very high-level journal, scientific journal in science or nature of a similar stature, academically speaking, but that's published in French with perhaps a summary or an abstract in English, a little longer than normal, perhaps, but to make the article more accessible to an Anglophone audience. Now, I don't know if I answered your question, but, well, yes. But you also mentioned the African Academy of Science. You're very familiar with that group. What kind of challenges do they face with respect to a decline of publications in French in Africa? Are they facing the same problems we are? Do they have the same statistics as we do? Well, I don't have any figures for you, but this year, for example, I sat on an election committee for the African Academy of Science. We interviewed the 90 finalists from a large competition, a Pan-African competition, and a good portion of the applications were submitted in French from the Maghreb region of northern Africa or the sub-Saharan area. I don't remember exactly the number, but I would say at least a third or a quarter of the applications came in French. It seems to me that the success rate is similar to those submitted in English, to those applications submitted in English. So there's a good example. It's a good example, the African Academy of Science. Good. Well, thank you. The role of a regional university in development, in developing French, is something because in Nova Scotia, there was historically a Francophone population. It disappeared over time. How can a university help promote a Francophone community? Now, there's only one Francophone university in Nova Scotia. It's Sainte Anne. How can that university play a key role in this recovery of Francophone publications?
Fairness. I had to be fair with you. I have to be fair with Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. Your time is up. Might you ask the witness if he could table an answer for you?
I would like to have to.
Thank you so very much. And dear colleagues, and to our witnesses, we thank you for being here tonight. We've come to the end of our time together. We thank you for your time, your expertise, and we will have to say goodbye to our witnesses now. We thank you. We hope you've had a good experience and you will want to come back. And to our colleagues, our parliamentary colleagues, I need 2 minutes of your time, please. So again, thank you to our witnesses. And Mr. Clerk, am I able to go on to the other part of the meeting? Thank you. Okay, dear colleagues, if I could have your attention for one final item before our meeting comes to a close. Last week, we circulated a proposed budget in the amount of $7,550 for the study on research and scientific publication in French. Is there a motion to adopt this study budget, please? I see Mr. Collins has his hand up.
Yep, I'll move that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is it agreed? I'm afraid, Mr. Clerk, I'm going to have to rely on you. I can't see everybody.
Yes, there seems to be unanimous consent to adopt.
Thank you so much to Mr. Clerk. And with that, thank you to everyone who joined the committee, all our witnesses. Our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, October 24th at 6:30. I'll see you all then. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.